Do you need help finding something? Or are you just looking for a place to feel safe? The little girl didn't answer right away. She stood at the end of the picture book aisle, with both hands pressed flat against her sides, her eyes moving slowly across the spines, like she was reading a language she almost understood. She was 4 years old, and wore red sneakers, and had the kind of quiet around her that made a room feel careful. Callum Hart crouched down to her level. He'd been a librarian long enough to know the difference between a child who was lost and a child who was searching. This one was searching. "My name's Callum," he said. "I work here. I know where everything lives." She looked at him then, really looked, the way small children do when they're deciding whether a person is trustworthy. Her eyes were large and dark and serious. "Do you know where the ones about animals are?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Specifically rabbits." "Specifically rabbits," he repeated, with full gravity. "I know exactly where those are." He stood and walked slowly, checking over his shoulder to make sure she was following. She was. 3 careful steps behind, watching his hands as he trailed his fingers lightly along the shelves. Callum was 33 and had worked at the Aldermore Public Library in Portland for 6 years. He had a quiet life that suited him. A small apartment above a bookshop, a rescued tabby named Finch, a manuscript that lived in a drawer and had lived there for 4 years because he couldn't decide if it was finished or if he was simply afraid to find out. He had studied literature, then education, then drifted into library work the way some people drift into the lives that actually fit them. Not with a plan, but with a gradual recognition. He loved the hush of it, the way a library held so many voices at once and still felt like silence. He loved the regulars and the strangers, and the children especially, because children came to books without pretense. They wanted what they wanted, and they weren't embarrassed about it. The little girl's name was Petra. He learned this when she pointed to a name tag sticker on her jacket, the kind given out at preschool, that read, Petra, in careful capital letters. "That's a beautiful name," he said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside the rabbit section, with 3 books spread between them. She studied the covers. "My mama picked it. She says all the best names come from books." "She's right," Callum said. "What does your mama do?" Petra turned a page. "She makes books," she said simply. "She finds stories and makes them real." It was 6:47 when Callum realized the library had been officially closed for 17 minutes. He'd lost track. He and Petra had moved from rabbits to a book about a lighthouse keeper's daughter to a picture book about a girl who could talk to clouds. And somewhere in between, the other staff had filtered out and the front lights had dimmed to the after-hours setting, and neither of them had noticed. He wasn't bothered. He had keys. He had nowhere pressing to be. What he hadn't expected was the woman who pushed through the front door at 6:51, her own key in hand, panic just barely controlled in her expression, and stopped when she saw her daughter sitting cross-legged on the library floor, a picture book open across her knees, listening with total absorption as a librarian read aloud in a voice pitched low and warm. She stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. Petra looked up. "Mama, this one has a rabbit who runs a bakery." The woman let out a breath that had clearly been held for some time. She walked over slowly, crouched beside her daughter, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Then she looked up at Callum. "I am so sorry," she said. "Her sitter called to say she couldn't make it, and I was in a meeting that ran long and She found the rabbit section on her own. She has excellent taste." The woman looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, from apology to something quieter, more attentive. She extended her hand. "Nora Vance. Callum Hart." Petra, satisfied with this, went back to her book. Nora was 29 and ran Vance and Meridian, the publishing imprint she'd built from a 2-room office, and a belief that mid-sized literary fiction still had an audience that the major houses had forgotten about. She had been right. The imprint was 6 years old, and had produced 4 bestsellers and 11 critically respected titles, and she had done it largely by trusting her instincts about which stories deserved to exist in the world. She had also, in those 6 years, become the kind of person who forgot to eat lunch and sometimes lost Petra's pickup time in the margin of a manuscript page, and who felt guilty about this in the mornings and forgot to feel guilty about it by noon. She carried that guilt quietly. She always had. What she didn't expect, what she couldn't have planned for, was sitting across from Callum Hart at the small staff table in the back of the dimmed library, while Petra dozed on a reading cushion with a rabbit book tucked under her arm, and finding herself in the middle of a real conversation. He was easy to talk to, not in a performing way, in the way of someone who actually listened, which was rarer than it should have been. "She doesn't warm up to people easily," Nora said, nodding toward Petra. "She's been like that since she was born. The pediatrician calls it selective engagement. I call it good judgment." "She warmed up tonight," Callum said. "She did." Nora looked at her daughter's sleeping face. "That means something." A pause settled between them, the comfortable kind. "Can I ask what you read her?" Nora said. She nodded at each one, and at the last, a quiet, out-of-print story about a girl who cataloged the sounds of her town, she stopped nodding and went still. "I've been trying to find the rights to that one for 2 years," she said. "It deserves to be back in print." "It does," she looked at him. "You know books. It's the job." "No," she said. "Plenty of people have the job. Not everyone knows the books." 3 weeks later, Nora received a package at the Vance and Meridian office. Inside was a manuscript. No cover letter, no query, no formal submission. Just pages and a note. "You asked once what I do besides work here. This is the other thing. I don't know if it's finished. CH." She read it that evening, sitting at her kitchen table after Petra was asleep. She read it in one sitting, which she had not done with a manuscript in 2 years. She set it down at midnight and sat in the quiet for a long time. The story was about a man who spent his life helping other people find the words they needed and had never once spoken his own aloud. It was tender and precise, and written in a voice that trusted the reader completely. It was, without question, the finest unpublished novel she had read in 6 years of looking. She called him the next morning. "It's finished," she said, without preamble. A long silence. "You read it?" "Last night. All of it." She paused. "Callum, it's finished. You just didn't believe it was." He didn't say anything for a moment. When he did, his voice was careful and quiet. "I wasn't sure anyone would." "I know," she said. "That's what this feeling is. That's why you put it in the drawer." Another pause. "If you'll let me." The silence that followed was the kind that holds a person changing. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes." The novel came out the following spring under the title, What the Quiet Holds. It appeared on 3 recommended lists before its release date. By its 6th week, it was a bestseller. Not a loud overnight phenomenon, but the slow, steady kind that happens when a story finds the people who needed it. Readers wrote letters. Librarians recommended it. A reviewer in a national magazine called it the rare book that feels like it was written specifically for you, whoever you are. Callum read that line standing in his own library on a Tuesday morning, before the doors opened. Finch presumably somewhere at home, knocking things off shelves, the Portland light coming gray and soft through the tall windows. He thought about Petra in her red sneakers, pressing her hands flat to her sides at the end of the aisle. He thought about the 17 minutes past closing. He thought about how nothing that mattered had been planned. Nora brought Petra back to the library on a Saturday in June, the kind of morning that felt like a reward for surviving a long winter. Petra went directly to the rabbit section. She knew where it was now, and pulled out 3 books with the focused efficiency of someone who had a system. Callum was at the front desk. He looked up and smiled. Nora set a copy of What the Quiet Holds on the counter between them. It was the finished edition, cloth cover, his name embossed in clean letters along the spine. "I thought you should have one," she said, "from me." Not from the press run, from me. He picked it up carefully. I stayed late for a 4-year-old looking for rabbit books, he said. I didn't do it for this. I know, Nora said. That's exactly why it came back to you. From across the library, Petra called out without looking up from her book. This rabbit is opening a second location. He laughed, full and real. Tell me everything, he called back. Kindness rarely announces its purpose. Callum stayed late because a small girl was searching, and it was in him to help her find what she was looking for. He didn't know what would follow. He couldn't have. He simply stayed and read aloud, and treated one quiet child like her search mattered, because it did. That is the whole of it, and somehow it was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.